Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Kevin Holt's eyes burned from staring at contract papers for 14 hours straight. The digital clock on his dashboard read 11:47 p.m. as he pulled into the driveway of his modest suburban Houston home. His body ached, but a sense of triumph pulsed through his veins. After years of sacrifice, of missing anniversaries and birthdays, of reinvesting every penny back into the company rather than enjoying it, the tech startup he had built from nothing was finally on the verge of making it big. The last light in the neighborhood to go dark was always his. Tonight would be different. Tonight, he would wake Roxy, tell her about the deal that was about to change their lives, and maybe, just maybe she would look at him the way she used to before the strain of financial struggle had dulled the shine in her eyes. As Kevin turned off the engine, he noticed unfamiliar headlights in his driveway, a sleek black Bentley parked where his spot should be. His brow furrowed. Who would be visiting at this hour? He stepped out of his aging sedan, briefcase in hand, when the front door of his house swung open, spilling warm light onto the porch. Kevin froze. There stood Roxy, his wife of 10 years, wearing nothing but a thin silk robe that clung to her curves. Her blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, freshly styled despite the late hour. But it wasn't her appearance that made his blood run cold. It was the expression on her face, a smirk of cruel satisfaction. Well, look who finally decided to come home, Roxy called out, her voice dripping with mockery. She leaned against the doorframe with casual disdain that Kevin's gaze drifted past her to the foyer, where 3 large suitcases sat neatly packed. A cold weight settled in his stomach. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart that Roxy's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "What's going on is that I'm done pretending, Kevin. I'm done with this pathetic life you've trapped me in." Movement from inside the house caught his attention. A figure emerged from the shadows, tumbler of amber, liquid in hand. Warren Belmont, real estate mogul, billionaire, and at 70 years old, more than twice Roxy's age. The older man's silver hair was slicked back, his tailored suit unwrinkled despite the hour. He placed a proprietary hand on Roxy's waist, fingers splaying possessively against the silk. Kevin stood perfectly still, mind racing to process what he was seeing. Warren Belmont, the man who had turned down investing in his company 3 years ago, claiming it was a fool's errand run by an even bigger fool. "Evening, kid," Warren said, his gravelly voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood. "Sorry about the inconvenience." His smile showed too many teeth, none of the warmth reaching his cold blue eyes. Kevin stepped forward, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "Roxy, what is this?" "This," she gestured between herself and Warren, "is me finally getting what I deserve." She pulled away from Warren and approached Kevin, her movements predatory. "You've kept me waiting for 10 years, Kevin. 10 years of just a little longer, and the big break is just around the corner. 10 years of watching my youth waste away in this miserable little house while you chase pipe dreams. We built this together," Kevin said, his voice low. "Everything I've done." "You're a broke nobody, Kevin." Roxy cut him off, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "I've wasted 10 years of my life waiting for you to be a real man. 10 years watching my friends buy vacation homes and designer clothes while I pinch pennies and make excuses." Warren chuckled from the doorway. "Tough luck, kid. Some men are born to rule, and some, well, they just get walked over." He swirled the whiskey in his glass with a casual flick of his wrist. Kevin looked between them, the pieces falling into place. This wasn't a sudden betrayal, this was planned, calculated. The knowledge settled like ice in his veins. "How long?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet that Roxy's painted lips curled into a cruel smile. "Long enough to know that Warren is everything you'll never be. Rich, powerful, connected." She leaned in closer, the scent of expensive perfume he hadn't bought her filling his nostrils. "Satisfying." Warren laughed, the sound echoing through the quiet street. "Don't take it personally, boy. Women like Roxy weren't meant for men like you. They need security, luxury things you clearly can't provide." Kevin's hands clenched into fists, nails biting into his palms. The urge to lash out, to scream, to break something crashed over him like a wave. But he remained still, his face betraying nothing of the storm raging inside him. "I want you gone tonight," Roxy continued, retrieving a manila envelope from beside the door. "I've had these drawn up for weeks. Divorce papers. Sign them. And what do you want from the settlement?" Kevin asked, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. Roxy laughed, the sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "You're so broke and in debt that I don't even want anything in the divorce. Just sign the papers and disappear like the loser you are." Warren stepped forward, placing his hand on the small of Roxy's back. "My lawyers assure me she's making the smart play here. Clean break. No assets to divide, because let's be honest, there aren't any worth fighting for." His eyes gleamed with malicious triumph. "Unless you count that failing tech company of yours? What was it called again? Something forgettable, I'm sure." Kevin's jaw tightened. 10 years of his life. 10 years of sweat, sacrifice, and determination, all dismissed as worthless by the man who now stood in his home, hand possessively placed on his wife's body that he should have seen it coming. The late nights when Roxy claimed to be with friends. The sudden interest in charity galas that she had previously mocked. The expensive clothes and jewelry that appeared in her closet, explained away as sales and gifts from friends. Roxy thrust the envelope at his chest. "Sign them. Now." Kevin took the envelope, his movements controlled and deliberate. He opened it and removed the papers, scanning the document. "You'll need a pen," Roxy said, holding one out to him with manicured fingers. Kevin took the pen, his gaze moving between Roxy and Warren. The woman he had loved for a decade, whom he had promised to cherish and protect, now looking at him with nothing but contempt. And the man beside her, smug in his victory, watching Kevin's humiliation with undisguised pleasure. In that moment, something inside Kevin Holt changed. The pain of betrayal crystallized into something harder, colder. He signed the papers without a word, his signature precise and unwavering. "There," he said, handing the documents back to Roxy. "You're free." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Roxy's face, as if his calm had unsettled her. She had expected anger, tears, pleading not this icy composure. "That's it?" she asked, snatching the papers from his hand. "You're not going to fight for us?" "For me?" Kevin looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not the woman he had loved, but a stranger wearing her face. "There's nothing left to fight for." Warren stepped forward, his arm circling Roxy's waist. "Smart man, knowing when he's beaten. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have plans to celebrate Roxy's newfound freedom." He pressed his lips to Roxy's neck, eyes fixed on Kevin, the gesture a deliberate taunt. Kevin turned away, walking to his suitcases. He loaded them methodically into his car, aware of the two sets of eyes watching his every move. When the last bag was packed, he returned to where Roxy stood. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said, his voice devoid of emotion that Roxy's smile faltered. "I already have." But there was something in her voice, a slight tremor, a hint of doubt. Kevin nodded once, then turned and walked back to his car. As he slid into the driver's seat, he heard Warren's mocking voice. "Don't worry about him, baby. Men like that, they're replaceable. Disposable." The front door closed, cutting off Roxy's response. Kevin sat motionless, staring at the home he had worked so hard to provide. The curtains in the bedroom window moved, and for a moment he glimpsed Roxy's silhouette intertwined with Warren's larger frame. He started the engine and drove away, not once looking back in the rearview mirror. The Parker Motel sat on the outskirts of Houston, a relic from the 1970s that had seen better days. The neon sign flickered intermittently, casting an eerie blue glow through the thin curtains of room 14. Kevin sat at the small desk, the cheap chair creaking under his weight. His laptop cast harsh light on his face as his fingers moved methodically across the keyboard. On the bed beside him lay his phone, screen displaying dozens of missed calls and messages from confused colleagues and friends. He ignored them all. 3 empty coffee cups sat scattered across the desk, testament to the hours he had spent hunched over his computer. But there were no alcohol bottles, no evidence of a man drowning his sorrows. Kevin Holt wasn't interested in numbing his pain. He wanted to feel every sharp edge of it, let it fuel what he was about to do. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:42 a.m. Kevin rubbed his eyes, but continued working. Sleep could wait. Vengeance could not dot on his screen. Articles about Warren Belmont filled tab after tab. Business achievements, charity galas, real estate acquisitions, the public face of success and respectability. But as Kevin dug deeper, cracks began to appear in the pristine facade. A sexual harassment lawsuit quietly settled out of court in 2018 that a suspicious fire at a competitor's construction site. Investigated but never solved. Former business partners who mysteriously went bankrupt after falling out with Warren's ex-wives who left the state after their divorces. Refusing to speak to the press, Kevin's eyes narrowed as he found a forum post from a former Belmont employee, quickly deleted but preserved in a web archive. Working for Warren Belmont is like making a deal with the devil. The money's good, but the cost is your soul. I've seen him destroy people for sport. The way he treats women. If the public knew half of what I've seen, he'd be finished. Kevin saved the post, adding it to a growing file labeled simply WB. Another folder titled R contained everything he could find on Roxy. Social media profiles, friends, habits, likes, dislikes, knowledge accumulated over 10 years of marriage, now weaponized. His phone buzzed again. A text from his business partner, Mark. Kevin, where are you? Davidson is asking questions about tomorrow's presentation. Call me ASAP. Kevin's jaw tightened. The Davidson Group. The potential investors who could make or break his company. In the chaos of personal betrayal, he had almost forgotten the meeting that could change everything. For a moment, doubt crept in. Should he postpone? His personal life was in shambles, his concentration fragmented by thoughts of revenge. That's exactly what Warren and Roxy would expect. For him to fall apart, to let his professional life crumble alongside his marriage. He picked up his phone and dialed Mark. Kevin, Jesus, man, where have you been? Mark's voice was strained with worry. Something came up at home, Kevin replied, his voice measured. But I'm handling it. The presentation is still on for tomorrow. Are you sure? You sound different. Kevin stared at the images on his laptop screen. Warren Belmont at a gala, arm around a much younger Roxy, both smiling for cameras. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I've never been more focused. If you say so, Mark said, clearly unconvinced. The meeting's at 9 a.m. Don't be late. I won't be. Kevin ended the call and returned to his research. Hours passed. The first light of dawn crept through the thin curtains, but Kevin barely noticed. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, but his mind was crystal clear, formulating a plan that would shake the foundations of Warren Belmont's carefully constructed world. He opened a new document and began typing. Phase 1. Information gathering. The cursor blinked on the empty page beneath the heading. Waiting. Kevin leaned back in the creaking chair, memories of the previous night flashing through his mind. Roxy's cruel smile. Warren's mocking laugh. The humiliation of standing outside his own home while another man claimed what was his. His fingers returned to the keyboard, typing a single sentence. I won't just take everything from them. I'll make them wish they never crossed me. He sat back, reading the words, feeling their weight. It wasn't just anger speaking, it was a vow, a promise to himself. The hurt and betrayal he felt were being transformed, forged into something harder, colder, and far more dangerous. Kevin pulled up another search window and typed, Warren Belmont domestic abuse allegations. The results were sparse, too sparse for a man with Warren's reputation. That suggested money changing hands, records being sealed, stories being buried. He made a note. Find Belmont's ex-wives. Follow the money trail for settlements. Next, he searched for Belmont Development's zoning violations, remembering rumors he'd heard years ago about Warren's methods of acquiring prime real estate. More breadcrumbs, more threads to pull. By the time the motel's cleaning staff knocked on his door at 11 a.m., Kevin had compiled a detailed dossier on Warren Belmont's empire, its strengths, its vulnerabilities, and most importantly, its secrets. He ignored the knocking, too engrossed in his work to be disturbed. After a few moments, the maid moved on. Kevin stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of sitting. He walked to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. The man in the mirror was almost unrecognizable, eyes hard with purpose, jaw set with determination. Gone was the trusting husband, replaced by someone colder, more calculating. His phone rang. The display showed Davidson Group. Kevin took a deep breath and answered. "Mr. Holt, this is James Davidson. I wanted to personally thank you for your presentation this morning." Kevin's brow furrowed in confusion. "My presentation? Yes, your partner Mark did an excellent job in your absence. He explained you had a family emergency. I just wanted to let you know that we're very impressed with your technology and the potential applications. We'd like to move forward with the acquisition offer." Kevin gripped the edge of the sink, steadying himself. "That's excellent news, Mr. Davidson. What kind of offer are we discussing?" "We're prepared to offer $500 million, with performance incentives that could push it to $650 million over 3 years. Our legal team will be in touch with the details." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. $500 million. After years of struggle, of living paycheck to paycheck, of Roxy's constant complaints about money. "Mr. Holt, are you still there?" Kevin composed himself. "Yes, I'm here. That sounds very promising, Mr. Davidson. I look forward to reviewing the details." "Excellent. Our team was particularly impressed with the security applications of your algorithm. The potential government contract alone make this a very attractive acquisition." After a few more minutes of pleasantries, Kevin ended the call. He leaned against the bathroom wall, mind racing. $500 million, the night Roxy chose to leave in the night she mocked him as a broke nobody, was the night before he became one of the wealthiest men in Houston. That a laugh bubbled up from deep his chest, growing until it echoed off the bathroom tiles. Not a laugh of joy, but of dark irony. In trying to secure her future with a rich man, Roxy had just walked away from a fortune. Kevin returned to his laptop, a new energy in his movements. He opened the document where he had begun outlining his revenge and added a new section. Phase 2, Financial Positioning. With $500 million at his disposal, the scope of his vengeance expanded exponentially. He would need to be careful, strategic not just in how he destroyed Warren and Roxy, but in how he protected himself while doing so. He began typing rapidly, ideas flowing faster than his fingers could capture them. By the time he finished, the document had grown to 15 pages of detailed plans, contingencies, and targets. Kevin closed the laptop and lay back on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. For the first time since walking in on Roxy and Warren, he allowed himself a smile not of happiness, but of anticipation. The game had changed, and they had no idea what was coming. Kevin woke to the persistent buzzing of his phone. Groggily, he reached for it, the events of the previous day flooding back as consciousness returned. The screen showed 35 missed calls, 47 text messages, and 23 emails, all from the same group of people. Mark, their lawyer Jessica, and various members of his executive team. The clock read 7:15 a.m. He had slept for less than 3 hours after his planning session, but felt more rested than he had in years. Purpose was a powerful stimulant that he sat up and checked his most recent text from Mark. Turn on the news. Any channel. Now. Frowning, Kevin reached for the remote and switched on the motel room's ancient television. He flipped to a local news channel, where a polished anchor was mid-sentence. Biggest tech acquisition in Houston's history. Davidson Group's purchase of Secure Horizon Technologies for $500 million has sent shockwaves through the industry. The company's founder and CEO, Kevin Holt, was unavailable for comment, but sources close to the deal say this makes him one of the youngest tech billionaires in Texas. The screen showed Kevin's corporate headshot from the company website, a serious man in a Navy suit, looking directly at the camera. Below it ran the caption, "Local tech entrepreneurs' overnight success." The anchor continued. What makes this story particularly remarkable is Secure Horizon's humble beginnings. Started in Holt's garage just 8 years ago, the company struggled for years before developing their breakthrough encryption algorithm. The screen split to show a financial analyst in a separate window. What Holt and his team have created is revolutionary, the analyst explained. In an age where data security is paramount, their technology represents a quantum leap forward. The $500 million price tag might actually be a bargain for Davidson Group. Kevin stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across his face. His phone buzzed again, another text from Mark. "Where are you?" "The media is camped outside the office. Everyone wants to talk to you. Call me." Instead of calling, Kevin opened his laptop and navigated to his online banking app. He logged in to find his account still showing its usual modest balance. The money hadn't been transferred yet. Of course, that would take days of paperwork and legal processes, but soon, very soon. His email inbox was flooded with congratulatory messages from industry contacts, requests for interviews from journalists, and most satisfying of all, inquiries from investment advisors and luxury real estate agents who had previously ignored him. Kevin closed the laptop and returned his attention to the television, where they were now showing footage of his company's modest office building. Journalists crowded outside. A struggling local business has just been acquired for $500 million, the reporter on scene was saying, instantly making its owner one of Houston's wealthiest entrepreneurs. The question on everyone's mind now is, what will Kevin Holt do with his newfound fortune? Kevin switched the channel to another news station, where the story was also leading the morning broadcast. And another. Every local channel in Houston was covering the acquisition. He permitted himself a moment to imagine Roxy's reaction when she saw the news. The shock, the regret, the crushing realization of what she had thrown away. And Warren, the man who had dismissed Kevin's company as worthless years ago, now forced to acknowledge that he had been catastrophically wrong. His phone rang again. This time, it was Jessica, their corporate lawyer. "Kevin, where have you been? We need you at the office immediately. The Davidson legal team is here with the final paperwork, and there are at least 20 reporters outside demanding statements." "I had a personal emergency," Kevin replied, his voice calm. "But I'm handling it. Tell them I'll be there in an hour." "An hour?" "Kevin, these people have been waiting since 6 a.m. Mark is doing his best, but 1 hour. Jessica, there's something I need to do first." He ended the call and headed for the shower. As the hot water washed over him, he allowed himself to feel everything he had suppressed the night before. The pain of Roxy's betrayal, the humiliation of being thrown out of his own home, the rage at Warren's smug satisfaction. But rather than weakening him, these emotions hardened his resolve. By the time he stepped out of the shower, his path was clear. Kevin dressed in his best suit, the one Roxy had always said made him look almost successful. He styled his hair carefully, shaved with precision, and studied his reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at him was composed, confident, and utterly in control. Perfect, he checked out of the motel, leaving a generous tip for the cleaning staff, and drove to a nearby florist. Inside, he selected an extravagant arrangement of white lilies, Roxy's favorite, and had them wrapped in elegant paper. "Would you like to include a card?" the florist asked. Kevin nodded, taking the small card and pen. After a moment's thought, he wrote, "Congratulations on your new beginning. It seems we're both starting fresh today." He paid for the flowers and provided Warren's address for delivery, specifying that they should arrive as soon as possible. Back in his car, Kevin checked the time. He was already late for the meeting with Davidson Group, but that was part of the plan. Let them wait. Let them wonder. The power dynamic had shifted, and he intended to use every advantage. His phone rang yet again. Mark, for the dozenth time that morning. This time, Kevin answered. "I'm on my way." "Thank God." Mark exhaled heavily. "Where have you been?" "I've been covering for you since yesterday. The Davidson people are getting impatient, and the press is having a field day with speculation about your absence. I told you, something came up at home. Well, whatever it was, I hope it was worth potentially jeopardizing the biggest deal of our lives." Kevin's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "It was. Trust me on that." "Fine, just get here. And be prepared, everyone wants a piece of you today." As Kevin navigated through morning traffic, his mind drifted to Warren's penthouse across town. Meanwhile, in Warren Belmont's luxury penthouse overlooking the Houston skyline, Roxy lounged in a silk bathrobe, sipping her morning coffee. The night had been less than satisfying. Warren had fallen asleep almost immediately after they returned home, leaving Roxy alone with her thoughts. Doubts had crept in during those quiet hours. Had she made the right choice? Warren was rich, yes, but he was also controlling, demanding, and showed flashes of a temper that unsettled her. Still, the alternative, continuing to live in mediocrity with Kevin, was unthinkable. She took another sip of coffee and reached for the remote, turning on Warren's massive flat-screen TV. The morning news would distract her from these unwelcome thoughts. The anchor's voice filled the room. Tech acquisition in Houston's history. Davidson Group's purchase of Secure Horizon Technologies for $500 million. Roxy's cup froze halfway to her lips as Kevin's face appeared on screen. Makes him one of the youngest tech billionaires in Texas. Coffee splashed onto the imported marble floor as the cup slipped from Roxy's nerveless fingers. She stood, moving closer to the television, unable to process what she was hearing. $500 million. Kevin. Her Kevin, the man she had just divorced. The man she had mocked as a broke nobody less than 24 hours ago was now worth $500 million. No, she whispered, shaking her head in denial. No. What's all that noise? Warren appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, tying the belt of his robe. His face was puffy with sleep, his silver hair disheveled. Roxy couldn't speak. She merely pointed at the television, where an analyst was now explaining the revolutionary nature of Kevin's technology. Warren squinted at the screen, recognition slowly dawning on his face. Is that the same Kevin Holt? Your ex-husband? Roxy nodded, still unable to form words. Warren moved closer to the TV, his expression hardening as he listened to the details of the acquisition. Secure Horizon Technologies? That's the company he tried to get me to invest in 3 years ago. Again, Roxy could only nod at Warren's face flushed with anger. You told me he was a worthless loser, he shouted, turning on her with such suddenness that Roxy flinched. You said his company was going nowhere. I thought it was. Roxy finally found her voice. He's been struggling for years. There was never any money, never any success. How was I supposed to know? Warren grabbed her arm, fingers digging painfully into her flesh. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? I could have owned a piece of that company. I could have been part of a $500 million deal. Roxy tried to pull away, frightened by the rage in his eyes. Warren, you're hurting me. He released her with a shove that sent her stumbling back against the coffee table. This is your fault, he snarled, pointing an accusing finger at her. You convinced me he was nothing, that his company was a joke. I didn't know. Roxy protested, tears welling in her eyes. How could I have known? The doorbell chimed, interrupting Warren's next tirade. Still glaring at Roxy, he stalked to the door and yanked it open. A delivery man stood there, holding an enormous arrangement of white lilies. Delivery for Roxanne Holt? Warren snatched the flowers and slammed the door in the deliverman's face. He thrust the arrangement at Roxy. Seems you have an admirer, he sneered. With trembling hands, Roxy took the flowers and found the small card nestled among the blooms. As she read Kevin's message, the full weight of her mistake crashed down upon her. She had thrown away a fortune. Not just money, but a man who had been on the verge of spectacular success she would now never share in. The remote control smashed into the wall beside her head, making her cry out in shock. Warren stood, breathing heavily, his face contorted with fury. Get out, he growled. What? Get out of my sight. Go to the guest room. I need to think. Clutching the lilies to her chest, Roxy retreated from the room, Warren's cold eyes following her every step. As she closed the door of the guest bedroom behind her, she heard the sound of glass shattering. Warren taking out his rage on whatever was at hand. Roxy sank onto the bed, the flowers still in her arms, and began to sob. Not gentle tears of regret, but harsh, body-racking sobs of despair. In a single day, she had lost everything she had ever wanted and gained a future that suddenly looked far darker than she had imagined. Across town, Kevin Holt stepped out of his car in front of his company's offices. As predicted, journalists swarmed around him, shouting questions and thrusting microphones toward his face. Mr. Holt, how does it feel to become a multi-millionaire overnight? What are your plans for the future? Is it true that you developed the encryption algorithm in your garage? Kevin smiled, polite but reserved, as he navigated through the crowd. I'll be making a statement soon, he promised. Right now, I have a meeting to attend. Inside, The reception area had been transformed into an impromptu war room. Staff members hurried back and forth. Phones rang incessantly. And in the center of it all stood Mark, looking harried but exhilarated. "There he is," Mark exclaimed as Kevin entered. "The man of the hour." Employees broke into spontaneous applause. Kevin acknowledged them with a nod, then gestured for Mark to join him in his office. "The Davidson team is in the conference room," Mark said as they walked. "They've been here for hours." "Where have you been?" "Taking care of personal business," Kevin replied, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. "How are they?" "Eager to finalize the deal. The paperwork is ready. All it needs is your signature." Kevin paused at his office door. "And you're sure about the terms?" "Nothing changed overnight." Mark shook his head. $500 million, with performance bonuses that could add another $150 million over 3 years. Full retention of the executive team, including us. Davidson wants us to continue developing the technology under their umbrella. Good. Kevin straightened his tie. Let's not keep them waiting any longer. As they approached the conference room, Kevin's phone buzzed with text. He glanced down to see a message from an unknown number. "Kevin, it's Roxy. We need to talk. Please call me." A cold smile touched his lips as he silenced the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. Her message could wait. Forever, if he had his way. Mark pushed open the conference room door, revealing a table surrounded by men and women in expensive suits, all of whom rose as Kevin entered. "Mr. Holt." James Davidson stepped forward, hand extended. "Congratulations on building such an extraordinary company." Kevin shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Davidson. I understand we have some paperwork to sign." As he took his seat at the head of the table, accepting a pen from Jessica to sign the acquisition documents, Kevin allowed himself a moment of pure satisfaction. This was just the beginning. The fun from this deal would fuel his revenge, a revenge that would be served not hot with passion, but cold with calculation. Warren and Roxy had no idea what was coming, but they would. Soon enough, they would. Kevin Holt stood at the window of his temporary office, gazing down at the Houston skyline. 3 weeks had passed since the Davidson acquisition, and in that time, his life had transformed completely. The funds had cleared. The paperwork was finalized. And now, with $500 million in his accounts, the real work could begin. Mr. Holt, his new assistant, Melissa, appeared at the door. "The real estate agent is here." Kevin nodded, turning away from the view. "Send her in." Melissa stepped aside, allowing a sleek woman in her 40s to enter. She carried a leather portfolio and wore an expression of barely contained excitement. "Mr. Holt," she extended her hand, "I'm Victoria Reeves. Thank you for meeting with me today." Kevin shook her hand briefly. "You come highly recommended, Ms. Reeves. I understand you specialize in luxury properties." "I do," she smiled, opening her portfolio. "And I believe I found exactly what you're looking for." She spread photographs across his desk, images of a stunning penthouse with panoramic views of the city. "The Azure Tower," Victoria explained. "The most prestigious address in Houston. 65 floors of pure luxury. The penthouse occupies the entire top floor, 7,500 square feet of living space, plus a private rooftop terrace." Kevin examined the photos with calculated indifference. "And the price?" $22 million, Victoria replied, "which is actually quite reasonable considering." "I'll take it," Kevin interrupted. Victoria blinked, momentarily thrown by his abruptness. "Don't you want to see it first?" "No." Kevin handed the photos back to her. "Have the paperwork ready by tomorrow. I want to move in immediately." "That's unusual, but certainly doable." Victoria made a note in her tablet. "There are several interested parties, but with an all-cash offer." "Who are the other interested parties?" Kevin asked, his tone suddenly sharp. Victoria hesitated. "I'm not at liberty to..." "Double the asking price," Kevin said. $44 million. Cash. With one condition. I want the seller's acceptance today." Victoria's professional composure slipped. $44 million? "Mr. Holt, while I appreciate your enthusiasm, that's far above market value." "The price isn't relevant," Kevin said, his eyes cold. "What matters is that I get what I want. Make it happen." Victoria stared at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll call the sellers immediately. As she hurried out, Melissa reappeared at the door. Your 11 o'clock is here, the reporter from the Chronicle. Kevin checked his watch. Good. And the information I requested. Melissa handed him a thick folder. Everything we could find on Warren Belmont's business dealings over the past 20 years. The financial analyst you hired flagged several transactions that might be of particular interest. Thank you. Kevin took the folder, a small smile playing at his lips. Show the reporter in. The journalist who entered was young, hungry, with the eager look of someone chasing their first big story. Mr. Holt? Jack Wilson from the Houston Chronicle. Thank you for. Sit down, Mr. Wilson. Kevin gestured to the chair across from his desk. I understand you're writing a profile on Houston's newest tech millionaire. Billionaire, according to our latest estimates. Jack corrected with a smile. You're the talk of the town, Mr. Holt. Am I? Kevin asked mildly. Absolutely. Everyone wants to know your story. The overnight success, the brilliant innovation. It wasn't overnight. Kevin cut in, his voice sharp. I spent 10 years building this company. 10 years of sacrifice while others dismissed me as a failure. Jack nodded eagerly, pulling out a recorder. That's exactly the kind of detail I want to capture. Mind if I record? Go ahead. So, Jack leaned forward. What motivated you to keep going all those years? Kevin's expression darkened. Let's talk about something else. I'd rather discuss my future plans. Of course, Jack nodded, making a note. There are rumors you've purchased property in the Azure Tower, the same building where real estate mogul Warren Belmont lives. Kevin's smile was thin. Not just in the same building, Mr. Wilson. I've purchased the penthouse directly above his. Jack looked up, a spark of interest in his eyes. Above Belmont's? That's interesting. Any particular reason? I like the view, Kevin said simply. Now, let me tell you about my philanthropic plans. For the next 30 minutes, Kevin outlined his vision, a foundation focused on supporting victims of domestic abuse, with an initial endowment of $50 million. That's remarkably generous, Jack said, scribbling notes. Any personal connection to the cause? Let's just say I've witnessed the damage certain men can do when they think their money puts them above the law. Kevin slid a folder across the desk. You might find this interesting. Jack opened it, his eyes widening as he scanned the contents. These are records of settlements. Domestic abuse allegations against. He looked up sharply. Where did you get this? Public records, Kevin replied calmly. Buried deep, but public nonetheless. 7 women. 7 settlements. 7 silenced voices. Jack stared at the documents, journalist instincts clearly at war with caution. Mr. Holt, these allegations involve Warren Belmont. If you publish this, you'll have the story of your career, Kevin finished for him. Every document is verified. Every settlement confirmed. I'm simply shining a light on information that should never have been hidden. Jack hesitated, then closed the folder. You understand this could make you powerful enemies? Kevin's smile never reached his eyes. I'm counting on it. 3 days later, Kevin stood in his new penthouse, surrounded by workers installing furniture and artwork. The space was magnificent, soaring ceilings, walls of glass, and a wraparound terrace with views that stretched to the horizon. His phone rang Victoria Reeves. Mr. Holt, she sounded breathless. I just received a rather unusual call from Warren Belmont. Did you? Kevin replied, feigning surprise. Yes. He wanted to know who purchased the penthouse above his. When I told him it was you, she paused. Well, he was quite upset. He even offered to buy it from you at a substantial premium. I'm sure he did, Kevin murmured. He's offering $60 million, Mr. Holt. That's a $16 million profit without even moving in. Please convey my decline of his generous offer, Kevin said. And Victoria? Make sure everyone in your social circle knows about Mr. Belmont's desperation. I'd hate for such an amusing anecdote to go unshared. Of course. She sounded uncertain. Will that be all? For now. Kevin ended the call and walked to the edge of the terrace. Directly below, on the penthouse level of the adjacent wing, he could see Warren's private pool area. Through his binoculars, he spotted Warren himself, pacing angrily on his own terrace. Phone to his ear. Kevin smiled. Phase 1 was proceeding exactly as planned. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Holt? The audio technicians are here. Send them up." Kevin returned inside, where a team of men waited with equipment cases. "You understand what I need?" Kevin asked the lead technician. The man nodded. State-of-the-art sound system, powerful enough to be heard clearly throughout the entire penthouse, with special emphasis on floor penetration. "Perfect." Kevin handed him a USB drive. "This playlist should be programmed to begin at exactly 3 a.m., volume at maximum. The system should be impossible to turn off from outside this penthouse." The technician raised an eyebrow, but took the drive without comment. "Will you be here when it plays?" "No," Kevin said. "I'll be at my other residence. But I expect it to perform flawlessly in my absence." Later that evening, Kevin hosted his first gathering, an exclusive dinner party for 20 of Houston's most influential business leaders, socialites, and media figures. The guest list had been carefully curated to include people known for their gossip and connections to Warren Belmont circles. AS waitstaff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Kevin mingled with practiced ease, making sure to introduce himself to Constance Winters, Warren's closest business partner's wife and notorious gossip. "Mr. Holt," Constance gushed, "what an absolute marvel this place is. You must give me the name of your decorator." "I'd be happy to," Kevin smiled. "I understand you're good friends with Warren Belmont?" Constance's smile tightened slightly. "We move in the same circles, yes." "Interesting man," Kevin said casually. "I've been reading quite a bit about him lately." "Oh," Constance leaned closer, interest piqued. "Yes, his business practices are educational. Did you know he's facing substantial investor pullout after certain allegations resurfaced?" Constance's eyes widened. "I hadn't heard. It's not public yet," Kevin said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "But I have it on good authority that at least 3 major investment groups are quietly divesting from Belmont Developments after learning about those settled abuse cases." "Abuse cases?" Constance nearly choked on her champagne. "You haven't seen today's Chronicle?" Kevin pulled his phone from his pocket, bringing up the newspaper's website. The headline read, "Pattern of Abuse. Houston Tycoon's Dark Secrets Exposed." Constance took the phone, scanning the article with growing shock. I had no idea." "Few did," Kevin said. "That was rather the point of those settlements." 7 women, Constance. 7. "Excuse me," Constance said faintly, already pulling out her own phone. "I need to make a call." Kevin watched her hurry away, already dialing. By morning, every influential person in Houston would know about Warren's past. The carefully constructed reputation he'd built over decades would begin to crumble, and it was only the beginning. Week after week, Kevin escalated his campaign. Parties in his penthouse grew more lavish, while directly below, Warren Belmont found himself increasingly isolated as former friends and business associates distanced themselves. The financial impact was swift and devastating. 3 major projects lost funding. A bank pulled a crucial line of credit. Commercial tenants began breaking leases, unwilling to associate with a man whose name was becoming toxic. And every night at 3 a.m., Kevin's sound system came to life, blasting bass-heavy music down through Warren's ceiling, making sleep impossible. 1 month into his campaign, Kevin sat in his office reviewing the latest reports on Belmont's financial status when his phone rang an unknown number. "Holt," he answered curtly. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Warren's voice was ragged with fury and exhaustion. Kevin leaned back in his chair. "Warren, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "You know exactly what you're doing," Warren snarled. "The parties, the music, the lies you're spreading." "Lies?" Kevin's voice hardened. "Every document I provided to the Chronicle was authentic. Every settlement verified. Your past is simply catching up to you. You're destroying everything I've built." "Consider it karma," Kevin replied calmly. "How's Roxy, by the way?" A pause, then a bitter laugh. "You want her back?" "Take her. The bitch has brought me nothing but trouble." "I don't want her back," Kevin said coldly. "I just want to know if she's enjoying the life she chose." Warren's voice dropped to a menacing growl. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, boy. I've crushed men far more powerful than you. And yet, here I am," Kevin replied, "while your empire crumbles around you. How does it feel, Warren?" To lose everything? To watch helplessly as it all slips away? This isn't over, Warren hissed. You're right, Kevin agreed. It's just beginning. He ended the call and sat back, satisfaction coursing through him. Warren Belmont, the untouchable tycoon, was beginning to break point 2 months into his revenge campaign. Kevin received an unexpected visitor at his office. His assistant buzzed the intercom. Mr. Holt, there's a Thomas Reed here to see you. He says he's Warren Belmont's driver. Kevin frowned. This wasn't part of the plan. Send him in. The man who entered was tall and broad-shouldered, with the disciplined posture of former military. He glanced around nervously before approaching Kevin's desk. Mr. Holt, he nodded respectfully. Thank you for seeing me. What can I do for you, Mr. Reed? Thomas shifted uncomfortably. I'm taking a huge risk coming here. If Mr. Belmont found out, he won't hear it from me, Kevin assured him. What's this about? It's about your ex-wife, sir. Thomas's expression grew grave. I've been Mr. Belmont's driver for 7 years. I've seen how he treats women, but what's happening to Mrs. Holt? It isn't right. Kevin's face revealed nothing, but his interest was piqued. Go on. He's changed since all this started, the articles, the investors pulling out. He drinks all day now, and when he drinks, he gets violent. Thomas hesitated. 2 nights ago, I had to carry her to her room after it. The man stopped, unable to continue. After he what, Mr. Reed? Kevin pressed. After he beat her unconscious, sir. It's not the first time either. Kevin leaned forward. Why are you telling me this? Thomas met his gaze directly. Because I've got a daughter her age, sir. And no matter what she did to you, no woman deserves what's happening in that penthouse. He placed a small USB drive on the desk. Security footage from the private elevator. I thought you should see it. After Thomas left, Kevin plugged the drive into his computer. The footage showed Roxy entering the elevator, clearly intoxicated, her face bruised, makeup smeared with tears. But it was her eyes that caught Kevin's attention, empty, defeated, the look of someone whose spirit was breaking. That he closed the video, emotions warring within him. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? For Roxy to suffer, to experience the pain of her betrayal. But seeing the evidence of physical abuse stirred something uncomfortable within him. His revenge was meant to be calculated, controlled, not this brutal, primal violence. Kevin picked up his phone and dialed a number. Detective Reyes, a gruff voice answered. It's Kevin Holt. I have something you should see. That evening, Kevin sat in his car outside the Azure Tower, watching as police cars pulled up to the entrance. He had anonymously forwarded the elevator footage to the Houston Police Department, along with a formal complaint. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Reyes. Officers making wellness check now. We'll update. 20 minutes later, the police emerged without Roxy or Warren. Another text came through. She denied everything, refused to press charges. Nothing we can do without her cooperation. Kevin wasn't surprised. Victims often protected their abusers, especially when they felt trapped. And Roxy was trapped, financially dependent on Warren, her reputation in tatters after the very public revelations about her betrayal of the tech golden boy, as the press had dubbed Kevin. He started his car and drove home, an unfamiliar sense of unease settling over him. This wasn't the clean, controlled revenge he had planned. Something needed to change. The next morning, Kevin was reviewing acquisition proposals for a new tech startup when his private line rang. The number only 5 people had. Holt, he answered. Mr. Holt, it's Dr. Harris from Houston Memorial. Kevin sat up straighter. What's happened? We have a Roxanne Holt in our emergency room. You're listed as her emergency contact in our system. Ex-wife. Kevin corrected automatically. What happened to her? She claims she fell down the stairs, but her injuries are... The doctor paused, inconsistent with that explanation. Multiple contusions, 2 broken ribs, and a concussion. We're admitting her for observation. I see. Kevin's voice remained neutral. Why are you calling me? She has no insurance, Mr. Holt, and she's asking for you. Kevin's jaw tightened. I'll handle medical bills, but I won't be coming in. Mr. Holt. Good day, doctor. Kevin ended the call, then immediately dialed his lawyer. Jessica, I need you to set up an anonymous payment for medical treatment at Houston Memorial. Patient name, Roxanne Holt. The ex-wife. Jessica sounded surprised. Yes. Make sure it can't be traced back to me. Consider done. Anything else? Kevin hesitated. Find out if Texas has mandatory reporting laws for suspected domestic abuse. They do. Jessica replied promptly. Healthcare providers are required to report. Good. Make sure Houston Memorial understands their legal obligations in this case. After ending the call, Kevin pulled up the surveillance app on his phone connected to the hidden cameras he'd had installed in the hallway outside Warren's penthouse. The footage showed Warren storming out earlier that morning, face contorted with rage, and Roxy being carried out on a stretcher hours later. Something cold and hard settled in Kevin's chest. This had gone beyond psychological warfare. Warren Belmont wasn't just breaking under pressure. He was becoming dangerous. 3 days later, Kevin was reviewing security footage when his phone rang another unknown number. He almost declined the call. Then something made him answer. Hello, Kevin. Roxy's voice was small, scared. Kevin remained silent, neither confirming nor denying his identity. Kevin, I know it's you, she continued, her voice trembling. I need help. Wrong number, Kevin replied coldly, finger hovering over the end call button. Please. The desperation in her voice was palpable. He's going to kill me. I know he is. That sounds like a police matter. I tried that, Roxy said, her words tumbling out in a rush. They came, but he has friends in the department. They did nothing. And afterward, her voice broke. He said next time he'd make sure I couldn't call anyone. Kevin closed his eyes, conflicting emotions warring within him. Why call me? You made your choice, Roxy. I know. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and it was the worst mistake of my life. A bitter laugh escaped him. Funny how you only realized that after discovering I was worth millions. It's not about the money, Roxy protested. I'm trapped, Kevin. He won't let me leave. He takes my phone, controls every penny. The only reason I can call now is because he passed out drunk. Again, sounds like a police matter. Kevin, please. Her voice cracked with genuine fear. You were always the smart one, the planner. If anyone can help me get away from him, it's you. Kevin's fingers tightened around the phone. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. His revenge was meant to be elegant, controlled, watching from a distance as they destroyed each other. Getting directly involved wasn't part of the plan. I have to go, Roxy whispered urgently. I think he's waking up. Please, Kevin. The line went dead. Kevin stared at the silent phone for a long moment. Then, with deliberate coldness, he dialed her number. When the call went to voicemail, he waited for the beep, then spoke 4 words. Who is this? Click. He ended the call and tossed the phone onto his desk, turning back to his work. The pieces were in motion. Warren was crumbling under financial and social pressure. Roxy was trapped in a nightmare of her own making. And Kevin? Kevin was watching it all unfold exactly as he had planned. His revenge was no longer just a goal. It was a perfectly executed strategy, cold and merciless as the man he had become. Kevin sat in his darkened office, multiple screens illuminating his face with a cold blue glow. On each monitor, different camera feeds displayed various angles of Warren Belmont's penthouse. The surveillance system had cost him a small fortune to install discreetly, but money was no longer a concern. What mattered was that not a single moment of his revenge would go unwitnessed. He checked his watch, 2:14 a.m. According to Thomas, Roxy had been taking small amounts from Warren's safe for the past week, typically when the old man passed out from drinking. By Kevin's calculations, she must have accumulated close to $10,000 by now, enough to get far away, perhaps even start over somewhere new. The thought almost made him laugh. There would be no fresh start for Roxy.as if on cue, movement on one of the screens caught his attention. Roxy appeared in the master bedroom, carefully checking to make sure Warren was asleep. She moved with the cautious precision of someone who had grown accustomed to navigating around an unpredictable threat. Kevin leaned forward, watching as she slipped from the bedroom and made her way to Warren's study. His phone vibrated with a text from Thomas. She's making her move tonight. Train ticket to Chicago for tomorrow morning. Kevin didn't respond. Instead, he picked up another phone, a burner, and dialed Warren's private line. The bedroom screen showed Warren stirring at the sound, fumbling for his phone. What? Warren's voice was thick with sleep and alcohol. Mr. Belmont, Kevin disguised his voice, deepening it. I work security in your building. There's someone in your study right now. Looks like they're trying to open your safe. On screen, Warren sat bolt upright. What the hell are you talking about? The night guard saw it on the cameras, sir. Thought you should know. Before Warren could respond, Kevin hung up and watched the drama unfold. Warren staggered from the bed. Grabbing something from his nightstand, a gun, Kevin realized with a jolt of surprise. This wasn't part of the plan. Warren was supposed to catch her, confront her, maybe even hit her, but a gun changed the dynamics dangerously. For a brief moment, Kevin considered calling the police. Then he pushed the thought aside. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? For them to destroy each other. His hand remained steady on the desk, making no move toward his phone. On screen, Warren moved unsteadily toward the study, weapon in hand. In the other room, Roxy had the safe open and was stuffing cash in her purse, completely unaware of what was coming. Kevin watched, transfixed, as Warren flung open the study door. Roxy whirled around, her face a mask of terror as she saw the gun. I knew it. Warren's voice came through the audio feed, slurred but venomous. I knew you were stealing from me, you ungrateful whore. Warren, Roxy backed up against the safe, hands raised. It's not what it looks like. Warren laughed, an ugly sound. Really? Because it looks like my gold-digging bitch of a girlfriend is robbing me blind. Please, Roxy's voice trembled. I can explain. Explain. Warren advanced on her, waving the gun erratically. What's to explain? You thought you were trading up when you left your loser husband for me. Then he turns out to be worth millions. And suddenly I'm not good enough. Is that it? No, Roxy pleaded. Warren, you're drunk. Put the gun down. Don't tell me what to do in my own house. Warren roared, his face contorted with rage. You think I don't know you've been talking to him? Planning with him? Roxy's eyes widened in genuine confusion. What? I haven't. Liar. Warren struck her across the face with his free hand, sending her sprawling to the floor. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't have people watching you? Kevin leaned closer to the screen. This was an unexpected development. Warren believed they were conspiring together. That wasn't part of the plan, but it might work even better for his purposes. On screen, Roxy crawled backward, blood trickling from her split lip. Warren, please. I wasn't planning anything with Kevin. He won't even talk to me. More lies. Warren snarled, advancing on her. Get up. When Roxy didn't move fast enough, he grabbed her by the hair, yanking her to her feet. She cried out in pain. You're going to tell me everything, Warren hissed, pressing the gun to her temple. Every conversation, every plan, and then you're going to call him and tell him it's over. I can't, Roxy sobbed. There's nothing to tell. Warren's face contorted with rage. He dragged her from the study by her hair, Roxy stumbling and crying as she tried to keep up with his erratic movements. Kevin switched camera views to follow them into the main living area, where Warren flung Roxy against the wall next to the sweeping marble staircase that led to the lower level of the penthouse. Warren, stop. Roxy's voice was desperate now. You're going to kill me. Maybe that's what you deserve, Warren snarled, raising his hand to strike her again. But this time, something changed in Roxy's expression. The fear gave way to something harder, more primal. As Warren's arm came down, she ducked and lunged forward, tackling him around the waist. Surprised and off balance, Warren stumbled backward. The gun clattered to the floor as he grabbed wildly for the banister. Missing it by inches, Kevin rose to his feet, watching intently as Warren teetered at the top of the stairs, arms windmilling. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. Warren's expression shifted from rage to sudden, stark fear as he realized what was happening. Then he fell. The sound of his body tumbling down the marble staircase was sickening, a series of heavy thuds punctuated by a final, decisive crack as his head struck the marble floor at the bottom. Silence followed. Complete, absolute silence. Roxy stood frozen at the top of the stairs, staring down at Warren's motionless form. Blood began to pool around his head, spreading in a dark stain across the white marble. And then, something happened that Kevin hadn't anticipated. Roxy began to laugh. It started as a small, choked sound, then grew into full-throated, hysterical laughter. She sank to her knees at the top of the stairs, blood from her split lip mingling with tears on her face, her body shaking with uncontrollable laughter. Kevin watched, fascinated by this breakdown. He had wanted to destroy her, to make her suffer for her betrayal, but he had never imagined this complete unraveling done on another screen. The elevator to the penthouse began its ascent. Thomas had called the police, right on schedule. Kevin closed his laptop, cutting off the feed. He had seen enough. The trap had been set, and Roxy had walked right into it. In fact, she had exceeded his expectations by reacting with such violence, and that telling, damning laughter would be her undoing. He poured himself a whiskey and stood at his window, looking out over the Houston skyline. Far below, police lights flashed as cruisers pulled up to the Azure Tower. Soon they would find Warren's body and Roxy, still at the scene. Kevin raised his glass in a mock toast to the night. To choices, he murmured, and their consequences. The morning news blared from every screen in Kevin's penthouse as he dressed for the day, selecting a perfectly tailored suit with methodical precision. Breaking news this morning. The anchor's voice was grave. Real estate mogul Warren Belmont was found dead in his luxury penthouse last night, the apparent victim of a fatal fall. Police have arrested his girlfriend, Roxanne Holt, on suspicion of murder. Kevin paused, watching as footage showed police cars surrounding the Azure Tower. Sources close to the investigation report that Ms. Holt, who is the ex-wife of tech billionaire Kevin Holt, was found at the scene with a substantial amount of cash allegedly stolen from Belmont's safe. While Ms. Holt claims self-defense, witnesses report hearing her laughing after Belmont's fall. The anchor turned to face a different camera. We're going live now to the scene, where our reporter Alicia Martinez is standing by. The screen switched to a female reporter standing outside the Azure Tower, police tape visible in the background. Thanks, John. A shocking scene here at one of Houston's most exclusive residences. According to police sources, officers responding to a 911 call found Warren Belmont, 70, dead at the bottom of a marble staircase in his penthouse. His girlfriend, Roxanne Holt, 35, was taken into custody at the scene. Kevin finished knotting his tie, watching the coverage with satisfaction. While details are still emerging, we understand that Ms. Holt claims Belmont was physically abusive and that she acted in self-defense. However, police also discovered what appears to be stolen cash in her possession, raising questions about her motives. Kevin's phone rang. Mark, have you seen the news? Mark asked without preamble. I have, Kevin replied calmly. Jesus, Kevin. Your ex-wife killed Warren Belmont? This is going to be a PR nightmare. The company stock is already taking a hit. Arrange a press conference, Kevin said. I'll make a brief statement expressing shock and sympathy. Nothing more. Are you sure that's enough? People are going to have questions. The connection is tenuous at best. Kevin cut him off. My ex-wife's actions have nothing to do with me or the company. Make that clear to our investors. After ending the call, Kevin returned his attention to the television, where the coverage had shifted to old footage of him and Roxy at a charity event years earlier. For those just joining us, Roxanne Holt was previously married to tech billionaire Kevin Holt before leaving him for Warren Belmont just months before Holt's company was acquired for $500 million. Kevin smiled thinly. They were building the narrative exactly as he had anticipated. Poor Roxy, who had traded a future fortune for a violent older man, now accused of killing that same man for his money. The irony was almost poetic. His phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. Thought you might want to see this. Live feed from Central Booking. Attached was a video link. Kevin opened it to find a security camera feed showing Roxy being processed at the police station. Her face was bruised, her designer clothes torn and stained with blood. Her hands shook as officers took her fingerprints. She looked small, broken, and utterly alone. Kevin watched dispassionately for a few moments, then closed the feed. He had a press conference to prepare 4.3 hours later. Kevin stood before a sea of reporters, his expression appropriately grave. I am shocked and saddened by the tragic events involving my former wife and Mr. Belmont, he read from a prepared statement. While Roxanne and I have been divorced for some time, I would never wish such a situation on anyone. I ask for privacy during this difficult time and trust that the justice system will determine the truth of what occurred. Mr. Holt, a reporter called out. Had you spoken with your ex-wife recently? Kevin shook his head. No, our communication ended with our divorce. Were you aware of any abuse in her relationship with Warren Belmont? Kevin paused, appearing to choose his words carefully. I had no direct knowledge of their relationship dynamics. If abuse was occurring, that's deeply troubling and should be considered by the courts. Do you think she's innocent? Another reporter shouted. It's not my place to speculate, Kevin replied. That's for the justice system to decide. After a few more questions, Kevin's PR director stepped in, ending the conference. As Kevin walked away from the podium, a text appeared on his phone from Detective Reyes. Preliminary hearing set for tomorrow. Prosecution has strong case. Thought you should know they found surveillance footage of Belmont's abuse, but also evidence she was planning to flee with the stolen money for weeks. DA seeing it as premeditated. Kevin allowed himself a small smile. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The next morning, Kevin sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as Roxy was led and wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands and feet shackled. She looked nothing like the confident, glamorous woman who had mocked him in their doorway months ago. Her hair hung limp, her face pale and drawn, her eyes darting nervously around the courtroom. When her gaze finally landed on him, a spark of hope lit in her eyes. She mouthed something that looked like, "Help me," but Kevin's expression remained impassive. The district attorney presented the state's case with damning efficiency. Your Honor, while there is evidence of physical abuse by the deceased, the facts clearly point to premeditated murder motivated by financial gain. The defendant was systematically stealing money from Mr. Belmont over a period of weeks. She purchased a train ticket for the morning after his death. And perhaps most tellingly, witnesses, including the first officers on the scene, report that Ms. Holt was laughing uncontrollably after pushing the victim down the stairs. Roxy's court-appointed lawyer, a harried-looking man with a rumpled suit, did his best to counter. My client was a victim of severe and ongoing abuse, Your Honor. The money she took was her only means of escape from a dangerous predator. As for the laughter, that was clearly a trauma response. A trauma response that conveniently occurred after she had secured both escape money and freedom from her abuser. The DA interrupted. The state has evidence that Ms. Holt was in contact with her wealthy ex-husband shortly before the incident. We believe they may have been conspiring. Objection. Roxy's lawyer jumped up. That's pure speculation with no evidential basis. Sustained. The judge agreed. Counsel will stick to the facts. Kevin watched Roxy's reaction to the conspiracy allegation. Her head had whipped around to stare at him again, this time with confusion mixed with desperation. She clearly hadn't expected to be portrayed as his co-conspirator. The irony wasn't lost on Kevin. He had engineered her downfall while maintaining perfect distance. Yet now the prosecution was inadvertently suggesting they had worked together. It was an angle he hadn't anticipated, but one that might serve his purposes even better. After arguments concluded, the judge denied bail, citing flight risk and the severity of the charges. As Roxy was led away, she turned one last time, locking eyes with Kevin across the courtroom. "Kevin, please," she called out, her voice breaking. "Tell them the truth." "I never." The bailiff pulled her through the door before she could finish, cutting off her desperate plea. Kevin remained seated as the courtroom emptied, his face betraying nothing of his thoughts. A woman slid into the seat beside him, Jessica, his lawyer. "That was unexpected," she said quietly. "The conspiracy angle. Will it be a problem?" Kevin asked. Jessica shook her head. "They have no evidence. Your call history shows you never spoke to her except for that one call, where you clearly didn't recognize her number. It's a fishing expedition." "Good. I have to ask, though." Jessica hesitated. That last statement she made about telling them the truth. What truth was she referring to? Kevin stood, straightening his jacket. The delusions of a desperate woman. Nothing more. As they walked out of the courtroom, a reporter approached, microphone extended. "Mr. Holt, any comment on your ex-wife's situation?" Kevin paused, considering his response. "The truth always emerges eventually," he said, his voice carrying just the right note of regret. Sometimes the choices we make lead us down paths we never anticipated. The reporter pressed, "Do you feel any responsibility to help her, given your past relationship?" "Our relationship ended the moment she chose to leave," Kevin replied coldly. "The consequences of her subsequent choices are hers alone to bear." With that, he strode away, the perfect image of a man who had moved on from a painful chapter, betrayed but unbowed, sympathetic but detached. Behind the mask, however, Kevin felt the first real satisfaction since his revenge began. Roxy was facing the full weight of the justice system, her reputation destroyed, her future erased. And Warren Belmont, the man who had mocked and humiliated him, was dead, his empire crumbling, his legacy tarnished. It was better than he had dared hope for. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Kevin attended sporadically, always sitting at the back, always maintaining the same impassive expression. He watched as the prosecution methodically built their case, presenting evidence of Roxy's theft, her plans to flee, and most damagingly, the testimony of neighbors who had heard her laughing after Warren's fall. The defense did what they could, showing evidence of Warren's abuse and arguing self-defense, but the jury seemed unmoved by these explanations. That on the day of the verdict, Kevin made sure to be present. He wanted to see the final act of his revenge play out in person. On the charge of murder in the second degree, "How do you find?" the judge asked the jury foreman. "We find the defendant guilty, Your Honor." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Roxy swayed on her feet, gripping the defense table for support. "The defendant will be remanded into custody pending sentencing," the judge announced. "Court is adjourned." As Roxy was led away, she turned, scanning the courtroom until her eyes locked with Kevin's. In that moment, something passed between them, a recognition. She finally understood that this had been his plan all along. Not to win her back, not to save her, but to orchestrate her complete destruction. Kevin held her gaze, allowing a small, cold smile to touch his lips. Then he turned and walked out, leaving her to face the consequences of her betrayal alone. 2 weeks later, he watched the sentencing hearing on a private feed in his office. The judge's words were crisp and unforgiving. "Ms. Holt, this court has considered the mitigating factor of the abuse you suffered. However, the premeditated nature of your actions, the theft, and your apparent lack of remorse, as evidenced by your behavior immediately following Mr. Belmont's death, cannot be overlooked." Roxy stood with her head bowed, no longer the defiant woman she had once been. "I hereby sentence you to 25 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after serving a minimum of 15 years. 25 years. Kevin savored the number. By the time Roxy emerged, she would be 60 years old, her youth and beauty the attributes she had valued above all else long gone. His revenge was complete. 6 months later, Kevin adjusted his tie as his driver pulled up to the Houston Children's Hospital charity gala. The venue was spectacular, a historic hotel transformed with twinkling lights and elegant decorations. As he stepped from the car, cameras flashed. In the months following Warren's death and Roxy's conviction, Kevin had carefully cultivated his public image. He had established the Holt Foundation for Domestic Abuse Victims, donated millions to various charities, and positioned himself as a thoughtful philanthropist focused on giving back to the community. The scandal of his ex-wife's conviction had faded into background noise, overshadowed by his generosity and business success. If anything, the public narrative had cast him as the wronged husband who had risen above personal tragedy to help others. "Mr. Holt," a young reporter approached as he walked the red carpet. "Amanda Chun from the Houston Tribune. Would you mind answering a few questions?" Kevin smiled graciously. "Of course. Your foundation has donated over $50 million to domestic abuse prevention programs in just 6 months. What inspired such generosity?" "I believe those with means have a responsibility to address society's most pressing issues," Kevin replied smoothly. "And few issues are as hidden yet devastating as domestic abuse." The reporter nodded appreciatively. "Some might see a connection to your ex-wife's situation. Has that experience influenced your philanthropic focus?" Kevin's expression grew appropriately somber. "We can all learn from tragedy, Ms. Chun. My foundation's work stands on its own merits. One final question, Mr. Holt. Any thoughts on your ex-wife's recent parole hearing? I understand it was denied rather decisively. Kevin's face revealed nothing of the satisfaction coursing through him. I haven't followed the details, he lied. But the justice system must take its course. Thank you for your time, the reporter said, before being ushered aside by event staff. Inside, the gala was a sea of Houston's elite business leaders, socialites, and politicians mingling over champagne and expensive hors d'oeuvres. Many of the same people who had once attended Warren Belmont's parties now gravitated toward Kevin, eager to be associated with the city's newest power player. Kevin. Constance Winters approached, air kissing his cheek. Your foundation's contribution to tonight's fundraiser is simply extraordinary. $20 million. You put everyone else to shame. Kevin smiled modestly. It's for a good cause, Constance. Indeed, she lowered her voice. Have you heard the latest about poor Roxanne? They say she's completely fallen apart in prison. Barely eating, hair turning gray already. Such a tragedy. Is it? Kevin asked mildly. Constance looked momentarily taken aback, then laughed nervously. Well, I suppose one reaps what one sows, doesn't one? Speaking of which, have you met Senator Harrison? He's been dying to discuss potential tech regulations with you. As the evening progressed, Kevin moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations and admiration with gracious modesty. It was nearly midnight when he found himself momentarily alone, standing near a large screen displaying the evening news on mute. A familiar face appeared on the screen, drawing his attention. Roxy, being led into a courtroom in handcuffs, looking haggard and defeated. The caption read, Former socialite Roxanne Holt denied parole after only 6 months in prison. The footage showed her breaking down as the decision was announced, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She looked nothing like the confident, beautiful woman who had once stood in their doorway and proclaimed Kevin a broke nobody. Any final thoughts on your ex-wife? Kevin turned to find Amanda, Chun beside him again, having noticed his attention on the screen. For a moment, he considered giving her the practiced, diplomatic response he had perfected. Instead, something colder and more honest emerged. Some people trade loyalty for money, he said, his voice soft but hard as steel. Then they realized too late that loyalty is priceless. The reporter's eyes widened slightly at his candor. Off the record, of course, Kevin added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Of course, she nodded, clearly filing away his words nonetheless. Kevin turned back to the screen, watching as Roxy was led away, frail and broken, tears streaming down her face. A sense of complete satisfaction washed over him. He had lost everything once: his wife, his home, his dignity. Now Roxy had lost everything, and Warren had lost his life. And Kevin? Kevin had emerged stronger, wealthier, and more powerful than either of them could have imagined. That a waiter passed with a tray of champagne. Kevin took a glass, raising it slightly toward the screen in a private toast. He had won. Completely and utterly won. And it felt exactly as sweet as he had imagined.